Margie here. It's springtime, and for many of us, that's the beginning of gardening season. And I love gardening. It's such a win-win to be out in nature, in the dirt, planting. It's so wonderful. However, there are things we need to avoid to make it safe if we have osteoporosis. And in today's episode, that's what I want to discuss because I've seen too many people have a fracture or an injury because they weren't aware of this. So I'm going to make this very simple and tell you what to avoid as well as what you can do instead. So here we go. Number one, we want to avoid gardening with a rounded back. There are three curves in our spine: an inward curve in our neck, an outward curve in our middle back, and then the low back, an inward curve. And think about gardening. Think about the position. It's a tremendous amount of time in this rounded posture. So what's the problem with that if we have osteoporosis? Well, there's a big problem. So if we look at the spine or think of the spine, there's the front of the spine, and then if we feel our back, that's the back of the spine. So ideally in a young person, and for people who are watching this, you can see my spine here. But if not, just imagine the vertebrae, there's vertebrae in the spine. It's nice and square shape. But what happens with osteoporosis, if you have changes or weakness, oftentimes I could change the shape, or if there's any kind of fractures, which sometimes we don't even know about, they're wedge fractures, and they occur in the front of the spine. So instead of being square shaped, and if you can see on this model here, for those who are looking, it's much narrower and it's a wedge shape. And so it's the front of the spine that these occur, these fractures. So now if you take the spine and if you were to bend it forward, we're putting all the force in an area that's already weakened. So it's not the back of the spine that fractures, it's the front. And so doing this rounding, when we talk about exercises, we say we don't want rounding, forward bending. There was a study done a while ago, which they will never repeat, at the Mayo Clinic, and they found that they looked at fractures over a 1 to 6 year period of time with people who had osteoporosis. And they found that when people were only doing those rounding exercises, like touching your toes and sit-ups and rounding the spine, they had an 89% fracture rate versus the group that was doing extension, backward bending, strengthening a back, who had a 16%. So we don't want to do that because it puts too much force in the front of the spine. Not that we can't bend and do things, but we bend from the waist. I'll talk about that after. We don't bend from the waist. We bend from the hips and knees and not the waist. So the point is, if we think about when we're out there and we're really thinking about our plants and the flowers, are we thinking about our position? Now, when we exercise, we may be thinking of our position, but what I've seen is people just get so involved and they love it, which is good. I'm very big into being mindful, but they're not thinking about their bodies and what they're doing. And there's another way. So the number one thing to avoid is rounding your back when you're gardening. Now, one way to do that is, as I mentioned, we have an inward curve in our low back. So if we can maintain that curve during our activities, that's going to make a difference. So what I like to do, I like to think of our spine lengthening. So think of your spine lengthening because gravity wants to push us in. So our spine is always lengthening. Either your head can be a helium balloon or attached to a helium balloon, and just visualize the spine lengthening. And you want to be in that position. So if you are bending, you can bend from the hips and maintain this position. So I'm hinging from the hips, maintaining this position while I do things instead of rounding out and collapsing. You want to think of your ribs also. There's space between your rib and your pelvis, and you want to maintain that length while you're doing the gardening. So that's number one. We don't want to round out our backs while we're gardening. And one way to do that is just think about maintaining that inward curve in our spine. So that's number one. And another part of that, number two, though, is instead of bending from the waist, a lot of us think that we should bend from the waist. No, that's never where we were meant to bend. If you look at young children, they squat, they bend from the hips and knees, not the waist. So whenever we're doing bending, we want to avoid bending from the waist and bend from the hips and knees. And we can do that hip hinge where we're maintaining that inward curve in our low back. And I think oftentimes you can't think of all these things, but if you just think about maintaining that inward curve in your low back, think about your clavicles as smiling so that you're not collapsing here at all. You can think of your shoulder blades back and down, but that becomes a little, that's what we're really doing. But we want to just think about having like a smile on our clavicles, or it's smiling, or we just won the Olympics and we're wearing a medal that everyone's seeing. We don't want to collapse in our guarding. We want to stay in this good position and stay lengthened. Okay, so to repeat, number one, avoid the rounded posture. Number two, we want to avoid bending from the waist. We're going to bend from the hips and knees, maintaining the inward curve in our low back. Okay, number three, we want to especially avoid bending and twisting. And that happens all the time. You want to get to those flowers. So you just bend and twist at the same time. The problem with that is still with the bending, we're increasing force on the front of the vertebrae. And the second thing is with twisting, then we're adding torque to it. So now we have a double whammy. And this is also a mechanism of injuring your disc. So besides osteoporosis, this is just not good for your back. So what you want to do, you want to just move your whole body. So you can either, move it so you're facing, sometimes we're lazy. Oh, I'll just get to that flower. So just move so you can be right in front of it and you can bend forward, or just turn your body. And so that you're facing it. So you don't have to do bending and twisting together. You don't want to do that. You want to be as straightforward as you can. Okay, one more thing I wanted to say. For the bending, what you can do afterwards, I always recommend, because sometimes you'll still be, we're trying not to do any of that rounding, but sometimes you still may end up doing a little rounding. But one thing we can do beforehand is do backward bending. And I have all these exercises. There's a handout that will be in the show notes, and it's a handout that I've created for May, which is Osteoporosis Awareness and Prevention Month, on exercise and osteoporosis. So I go through like a 30-minute, the principles of exercise and osteoporosis, as well as I go, and they'll go into this forward bending even in more detail. But also I have posture exercises on there, balance exercises, and 2 really great weight-bearing exercises you can do for your bones. So make sure to download that. But in the posture exercises, you'll see the backward bending, where you're standing and backward bending. And as long as that doesn't hurt you, only go to where you can. Some people have ankylosing spondylitis or a problem with their spine, but even just a little bit will take you out of that rounded position. So that's a good thing to do before, after, and in between gardening. Okay, so we have the first 3 now. We're going to avoid rounding the back. We're going to bend from the hips and knees and do not the waist. And we're going to especially avoid bending and twisting. And we're going to just try to position yourself so you're right in front of what you're trying to do and you don't have to twist. Hey, Margie here. I love sharing resources that can help us address issues we are facing. And unfortunately, we are exposed to over 100,000 toxins every day. Toxins are hiding in the food you eat, the air you breathe, the water you drink, the products you use on your skin and use to clean your home. It's an epidemic underlying so many of our health issues and something we don't talk about enough. That's why I want to share a podcast I listen to weekly. It's the top 50 highly rated Myers Detox podcast from one of our former guests and an environmental detox expert, Dr. Wendy Myers. The Myers Detox podcast dives deep into cutting-edge strategies for detox, hormone balance, weight loss, fatigue, and brain fog. If you want to learn how to protect yourself from toxins in your daily life, get to the root cause of your chronic symptoms, transform your skin and hair, and hack your metabolism, as well as releasing old traumas, then I highly recommend tuning into her show. Simply search Myers Detox, Myers Detox, on your preferred podcast platform. Now back to the show. Okay. The next thing what we want to do is oftentimes, let's say we're raking or we're standing. If we're raking, a lot of times people are raking with their arms and their back, and they're putting all this force on the spine. We don't have to do that. What we can do, we can use our legs. Our legs are very powerful. So just like one leg in front of the other, and shift back and forth, and you can maintain that good position. You're using your legs to work. This is great also for vacuuming and doing things around the house. But this works when you're standing and you're raking, or even if you're doing shoveling, anything, use your legs, maintain that inward curve in the back. You can even do the stabilization where you're bringing your belly button up and in and contracting the pelvic floor so that you're stabilizing if you're doing anything that's a little bit heavy. But the key thing here is I want you to avoid really working your arms, your arms and back. When you're doing standing, you can use your legs. It was interesting because for many years, I taught ergonomics and I would go into corporations and, all sorts of people who have had injuries, but we also did a prevention program. And it was really, it was so funny because I was talking to the people who were doing, all sorts of physical work, whether they were mopping or cleaning. And what they told me, they said, what we've learned to do so we can stay healthy is to dance with our broom or our mop. So they're moving with it. They're using their body, their whole body. They're not overusing the small muscles in their shoulders and their back. So that's just a good concept to utilize. Okay, so let's see, we had the rounding the back, bending from the hips and knees, not the waist. We're going to avoid bending and twisting. And we're going to avoid, when we're standing, doing things, we're going to use our legs instead of overusing our arms and our back. Okay, the next thing we want to avoid is being in one place for too long a period of time. The body doesn't like static postures. And I know you get excited, you're working on the flowers. I mean, the good thing about gardening is oftentimes you do move, but you may still be bent over for a period of time. We don't want that. What we want to do is move. Motion is lotion. So I would say like every 20 to 30 minutes, even 20 minutes, just get up. Do that back bend that I said it's in the handout as well. But do that back bend or do a qigong, do some type of good exercise. And there's also a qigong handout. There's also a really good exercise for posture when you download the posture exercises. The point is move. Don't just get stuck and say, oh, I have to finish this, and you're in extended period of time. That's how injuries occur. The body does not like that. So just move, use different muscles, get up, walk around. The extra time you're going to take is going to be worth it. The next thing that I want you to avoid is to try to do everything yourself without tools. There are tools and there's equipment we can use to make our work less. Why would we not use it? And a lot of times we just don't know about it. So there are things, if you can't reach, get a reacher. Or there are things to weed. They actually make devices when you're standing that you can easily use to weed, as well as there's a bench that you can sit on. And a lot of times they have a bench that's also a kneeler. And the knee pads, because so often people are in so much pain because their knee, you're putting your knee right on a hard surface. So definitely invest in knee pads, in the chair, the bench, so that you can rest or you can sit, and then keeping your back straight. That's the key. Back straight and lengthened. You'll be bending from the hips, but you're going to be on the chair. So you're not going to be on the ground. So that may make it easier, especially if you have any problems with your knees. it may make it a lot easier. So get the devices. I think it's a big mistake not to and just say, oh, I can do this. So I'm a big believer in using technology and using whatever devices we can. Okay, and the last one that I wanted to share, a lot of people don't know about this. Do not get up and go right into the garden first thing in the morning. And you may say, why is she saying that? The sun's out, it's so nice. The reason I'm saying that is in the morning, your discs are as full of water from the night, from lying there. Your discs soak in water overnight. So in the morning, there's more fluid in the disc. And that may be fine. But if you do anything, you're going to be more at risk for injuring yourself, because if there's more fluid and you bend and twist or do something incorrectly, you're going to be at more risk of having a problem with your disc. No big deal. What you can do is just walk around, just do something for maybe 30 minutes. So you're walking, you're getting that pumping action before you go into the garden, or wait, at least an hour or two beforehand. But if you just walked around for a half hour and moved, you should be fine. But sometimes people get up and they get right into the garden. They want to get an early start. So those are the 7 things to avoid when gardening. But I want to just show you a few more things. So I'm going to show you a few slides. And then I made this very short video demonstrating some of the concepts that I talked about. So let's share the slides. And here we go. So we talked about bending from the hips and knees and not the waist. And I just am showing this because what we do in our life is the same as we're doing gardening. And this was just a good illustration of, you see, she's bending from her waist and she's rounding out her back. And we could be doing this all day long when gardening, versus here she's bending from the hips and she's maintaining that curve in her low back and not putting the forces on her upper back. Okay, this is a good illustration what I talked about with the rake or with anything. You see she's using the small muscles in her arms, her back, and rounding her back while she's mopping. So instead, she's going to use her legs, go back and forth, maintaining a good posture. Okay, so now she's just trying to fix something in the garden, all rounded. So I want you to think what she could do if you're watching this. So for those who aren't watching this, she's just standing and rounding. And all she needs to do is kneel. Simple. It only takes an extra minute. And in the video you're going to see in a minute of me, I realized I said half squat and I meant kneel, or a half kneel. But this is such a great position. Again, you can use the knee pads as well. But she's it's just a matter of figuring out how you can maintain a good posture, maintain your low back curve, a lengthened spine while you're doing these while you're in the garden doing these different activities. Okay, so I'm showing a man here who's bending down, all rounded out to pick up the flowers. So if he just knew how to squat, he'd be all set. And I'm showing another picture of a woman who is rounded out as well. And we could be all day long rounded out in the garden. And that's what I want you to avoid putting those forces on your spine. I'm also showing now, for those who are just listening, a picture of children playing in the garden. And they're in these great squat positions, as well as the parents. And they're stable. They're not going to hurt themselves in this position. And I'm now showing a picture of a man cutting trees, but he's standing. He's not bending. He's at the right level. So you can always use stools, different things, so that you don't have to be in an awkward position. And now there's a woman who's kneeling. So she's maintaining her back straight. She's not rounding out in this kneeling position. Now, I'm also showing now, we talked about shoveling and different things. And here is a person who's bent forward and rotated. So with the shovel or with the rake, as best you can. Again, I believe in also stabilizing, where you're contracting your belly button in and up as you exhale. Pretend it's an exercise if you're raking, and also the pelvic floor. But he's rotated and he's bent forward. So just like I said, you keep your back straight and you use your legs and you move your legs instead of twisting your body. This is just showing it's called a 4-claw garden weeder, but you could be upright and you could be weeding. So that could take, just what I said, use tools. And This is also, this is a kneel. You can kneel, and you could also turn around, and it could be, if you turn it the other way, it could be a low stool to sit on in the garden. So there's lots of different things that you can use and take advantage of. Okay, so now I'm going to play a quick video that I created just showing you about the bending and how you can practice that at home so that when you're out in the garden, you've got this squat and you've got these, you've got the bending down so that you do not hurt yourself. One thing, when I made this video, I said half squat, I meant half kneel. So, okay, so it's very short, but it goes over some of the points that I talked about. I wanted to demonstrate a few of the things that I just talked about. So the 3 curves in our spine: inward curve in the neck, outward curve in the mid-back. And this is the important area I was telling you about, in the low back, that inward curve that we want to maintain. So one way we could practice is take a part of a brew, where I happen to have this yardstick, and you want this to touch the back of your head, your spines, and right here in the sacral area. And you want to maintain those points while you do your squat. So you'd be going down, maintaining that curve in the low back that we talked about. And so I always do some stabilization, my belly button and up, the knees up, but we're going down, maintaining the curve. That's what I'm trying to show you. And that's the motion that we want to use when we're doing any of our gardening. Now, you can also practice that in and out of a chair. It's the same motion. If you were sitting in your chair, you would just do the same motion and you're maintaining all those curves. So it's the same motion. We're hinging from the hip. It's this motion. We are not collapsing at the weights. That's the key. This is what we want to avoid. So when I told you could get a low bench to do your gardening, what I'm talking about then is when you're going to be bending down, instead of collapsing like this, everything's rounded, I'm putting a lot of force on my back, increasing my risk of fractures. Now, if I do it this way, I'm good. I'm able to do things. And when you're in the garden, you can hold on to one leg. You're sitting. You can also, when you get the squats down, when you're in this position, you can do different things as well. Now, I mentioned, this is my little, not the cleanest, because there's lots of places, but these are my knee pads. And so you can do a half squat on that. It's really helpful because it really takes, especially sometimes you're not on grass or it's a hard surface. So this can help as well. So I highly recommend the knee pad. The last thing I wanted to show you is something called a golfer's lift. And this comes in handy. If you have to pick up something low in the garden, do something, what you're going to do, you're going to hold on to with one hand, and you're going to lift the opposite. So if we're going to pick something up with our right hand, the key is my back is straight. I can try to, we're going to lift one arm while we lift the other leg. So we're just lifting one arm's up, one leg's up, we're keeping our back straight. Okay, so I hope this helps and enjoy your gardening. I hope you found these tips helpful and can put them into your life. The most important thing is the awareness. Be aware of your posture when you're in the garden and enjoy the garden. It's so wonderful. You're getting vitamin D. You're out in the sun. It's relaxing. You're connected to nature and you're planting. What could be better? And when you avoid these positions and use good posture and body mechanics, you can do this safely. So it's a win-win situation. Make sure to check out the handout that I created for Osteoporosis Month on exercise. There's lots of easy exercises to put into your day, and especially those posture exercises. Those will help you with the gardening, and especially the one going backwards. That's something you could just add in throughout, in between while you're getting up and moving around. So thank you so much for tuning in, and I look forward to seeing you on the next episode.